Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, so now we continue, and just sort of to recapitulate, we've been going through the chaitasikas. These are the mental factors, the states that are associated with the citta, and we've been going through what are called the beautiful factors. There are 25 beautiful factors. And so in the last class, I went rather quickly, but it's necessary, through the 19, what are called the 19 universal beautiful factors. And so now we're coming to several sets of additional beautiful mental factors which are not universal to all beautiful states of mind, to all beautiful cittas. These are mental factors that might be present in the beautiful cittas, maybe are not present. Okay, so we come to first a set of three of them, which are called the three abstinences, or in Pali, virati. And so we'll read these together in the Pali. Sama vacha, sama kamanto, sama ajivo chati, tiso viratio nama. Okay, so the meanings of these are right speech, right action, right bodily action, and right livelihood. So these are termed the abstinences. And probably you'll be able to recognize that these three factors are also included in the Noble Eightfold Path, the middle factors in the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so it's said in the explanation that these three beautiful mental factors are responsible for deliberate abstinence from wrong conduct by way of speech, action, and livelihood. And now, according to the explanations in the Abhidhamma commentaries, these abstinence factors are present in mundane consciousness, that is, the beautiful types of mundane consciousness, not the supramundane. So in mundane consciousness, these abstinences are present only on an occasion when one intentionally or deliberately refrains from a wrong type of conduct when an opportunity has arisen. Okay, so maybe in my day-to-day life, say, I'm not facing any temptation to commit some wrong action, but I'm having beautiful cittas. Okay, like say I'm doing walking meditation or meditation on the breath. Okay, so on those occasions, except when I'm overcome by distracted thoughts, but if I'm well focused, then those are beautiful cittas are arising. But in those cittas, the abstinences are not present. This seems a little strange. So the abstinences will arise if I'm taking the precepts. Say, if I'm taking the 5 precepts, then I make, and not just reciting mechanically, but I'm doing with attention to what I'm reciting. Then when I say panati pata veramani sikapadang samadhiyami, I undertake the precept to abstain from destroying life, to abstain from stealing, to abstain from sexual misconduct, to abstain from false speech, to abstain from intoxicants. Okay, on those occasions, then the mental factor of abstinence is arising. And if I meet a situation where, say, I'm tempted to break one of the precepts, but then I draw back and I stop and restrain myself, then an abstinence has arisen. For example, some mosquitoes might be biting me, and then I'm tempted to kill. Then I remember that it's not right to kill living beings. So then there's abstinence has arisen. The abstinence, that would be samakamanto, right action. And then say if I'm in a situation where I can get my advantage by telling a little lie, and so I'm tempted to speak the lie, but then I restrain myself because of the precept, then the abstinence of right speech has arisen. Or if I get angry with somebody and I'm tempted to speak angrily and harshly and denounce that person, but then I restrain myself, again, right speech has arisen. And then if one faces the opportunity to earn one's living in a wrong way, even by cheating, by falsely, say, the salesman falsely misrepresenting the product, but then one restrains oneself, then right livelihood has arisen. Okay, so that is in the mundane citas. The abstinence arises only when one faces a situation where one might break the precept, or one might break one of these three types of conduct, good conduct, and then one restrains oneself because one has undertaken that abstinence. Okay, so here's the explanation. Right speech is deliberately abstaining from wrong speech. That's from lying, from slander or dividing others, from harsh speech, and from frivolous talk, idle chatter. Right action is deliberately abstaining from wrong bodily action, from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. And right livelihood is deliberately abstaining from wrong livelihood. And then the text mentions several kinds of wrong livelihood, dealing with in poisons, intoxicants, weapons, slaves, or animals for slaughter. Okay, so as I said, in the mundane citas, the mundane beautiful citas, these abstinences are present only when one deliberately abstains from one of the wrong types of conduct. But as we'll see, in the supramundane, the world-transcending citas, that is, in the four kinds of paths and the four fruits, in those citas, the three abstinences are present and present simultaneously. All three of them arise. Because that is the arising of the 8 factors of the Noble Path. And so these 3 factors are present. Okay, so those are the 3 abstinences. Okay, then we come to another group. These are called, in Pali, Uppamanya, and in English, the Illimitables or the Immeasurables. I know in Chinese it's the Wuliang. the Se Wuyang. Okay, so we speak about 4 immeasurable qualities or states: loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy or altruistic joy, and equanimity. And now if you look here, here we have the explanation. So the Illimitables are 4 attitudes towards living beings, and they are to be developed towards all living beings. And so they have a potentially immeasurable or limitless range. So the 4 are loving kindness, that's metta, compassion, karuna, appreciative joy, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha. And so they are also called the Brahma Vihara. So Vihara means a dwelling place, and Brahma is the divinity or the divine being. So these are 4 divine abodes. But here, you can see in the text, we have 2 illimitables. So maybe just we'll recite together. So, karuna, mudita, panna, appamanyayo namati. Okay, so compassion and appreciative joy, these are termed illimitables. And wait a minute, didn't you just say there are 4 illimitables? So why are there just 2 mentioned here? Okay, the reason is, we have loving kindness or metta, and according to the Abhidhamma way of analysis, metta or loving kindness is a mode or aspect of the Chaitasika called non-hatred. And equanimity or upekkha is a mode or aspect of that Chaitasika called, let's see how we... Here it was rendered, the Pali is Tatra Majjhatthana, number 7, neutrality of mind. So metta is considered an aspect of non-hatred, and equanimity is an aspect of neutrality of mind, mental neutrality. I have to say, earlier I said I have some sometimes difference of opinion with the textual Abhidhamma. And this is one area where I have some difference of opinion. Because it seems to me, to give the example, I'm doing my mindful walking back and forth, mindfully focusing on the breath, in, out, in, out. So on that occasion, there's no hatred in the mind. So we could say non-hatred is present. But doesn't that seem quite different from sitting and generating the wish, may all beings be well and happy, may all be well and happy? It seems to me to have a very different flavor. Okay, so that's my personal opinion, but I'm not here to promote my personal. Maybe I should write my own Abhidhamma. In fact, I found in my Abhidhamma book, I was sort of half aware of this, but I had a chart that had been prepared with the 51 mental factors of the other major Abhidhamma system, the Sarvastivada, which is also, I think, in the Yogacara system. And then this was prepared by Thich Nhat Hanh, and according to this diagram, or this table, even the Sarvastivada doesn't have a separate Chaitasika for loving kindness, but it has Advesha, which is the same as the Pali Adosa, absence of hatred. But then I see Thich Nhat Hanh had added sort of in a note some mental factors, wholesome mental factors that he would add. And he adds Maitri, which is the same as metta, loving kindness. And even the Sarvastivada Abhidharma, it seems, doesn't have separate mental factors for compassion and altruistic joy. And so Thich Nhat Hanh had added karuna and mudita, compassion and joy. Okay, so anyway, according to the Theravada Abhidharma system, loving kindness is represented by non-hatred, equanimity by mental neutrality, and we have two separate mental factors, compassion and appreciative joy. And these are not present in all beautiful mental states or beautiful chittas, but they are present when, if one develops the thought, one perceives beings, living beings, subject to suffering, then one generates the thought, may those beings be free from suffering, or how unfortunate it is that those beings are undergoing suffering. Then, on that occasion, compassion has arisen. And that compassion, it has the characteristic of promoting the removal of suffering in others, or its function is not being able to bear the suffering of others. And then on a different occasion, it won't happen at the same time as compassion, but if one sees other people meeting with some kind of success, or meeting with some kind of happiness, or you think of the good qualities of others, and then instead of being envious and competitive, one rejoices in their success, one rejoices in their happiness, then this quality of mudita, or appreciative joy, has arisen. And this has the characteristic of gladness or joy at the success of others, and it's opposed to envy at the success of others. Okay, so then we come to the last of the beautiful mental factors, and this is called in Pali amoha, which means non-delusion. But here, strangely, it's spoken of as panyindriya, the faculty of wisdom. Okay, so let's read this text. Sabbatapi panyindriyena sadding panchavisa time chaitasika sobanati veditabba. So together with the faculty of wisdom, these 25 are to be understood as the beautiful mental factors. Okay, so now this brings in wisdom or panya, which in the Abhidhamma it's the same as jnana or knowledge, and the same as the beautiful root of non-delusion, amoha. Okay, so wisdom is explained as knowing things as they really are. And then it's here called a faculty because it exercises dominance when understanding things as they really are. And it has the characteristic of penetrating or seeing things according to their real nature. And interesting, it says here, somebody asked the other day about wise attention. So it says the proximate cause of wisdom is wise attention, yoniso manasikara. Okay, so that takes us through the 25 beautiful mental factors, and it also completes our overview of the 52, the total of 52 mental factors. So of these 52, we have 7 are universals, 6 are particulars, sometimes present, sometimes absent. And so the universals and the particulars together, those 13, are called the ethically variable because they can change their ethical quality according to the cittas that they're associated with. If I'm thinking something unwholesome, that thought becomes unwholesome. If I'm thinking something good, then that thought becomes wholesome. Okay, then 14 mental factors are unwholesome, 25 are beautiful. So in that way, the 52 have been enumerated. If there's any quick questions, maybe we could take them now. Yeah, please.
Looking at the description for mudita, or appreciative joy, and the last sentence of that says, it succeeds when it causes aversion to subside, and it fails when it produces merriment. And I was wondering what the word merriment meant.
Yeah, I think, you see, it said that each of these 4 immeasurables has what's called a far enemy and a near enemy. The far enemy is the opposite state. The near enemy is something that seems a little bit like that divine quality, but it's really a worldly quality. Okay, so in the case of loving kindness, the far enemy would be hatred or ill will. Then the near enemy will be like worldly attachment. It's not that worldly attachment is necessarily something really bad, but it's just that it could disguise as loving kindness. So one has attachment to your wife, your husband, your children, and you think, oh, I have loving kindness for them. But it's not really the same as metta. In the case of compassion, okay, the far enemy is cruelty or harmfulness towards others, wanting to see others suffering. And then the near enemy is what's called worldly grief, that somebody is undergoing suffering, and then you are suffering along with them because you have a close relationship with them. So you think you're feeling compassion for them, but it's really just because of your attachment that you're sorrowful when they are sorrowful. Okay, then in the case of mudita, altruistic joy, the far enemy would be envy at the success of others. Then the near enemy is what here is translated what is it called? Merriment. Being merry, like the guys go out on the town together, they're all sort of enjoying the boxing match or the football game, and they're all happy and joyful together. And so they think that, since I'm enjoying my time out with the guys, I think I have appreciative joy for them. And then in the case of upekkha, or equanimity, The far enemy is like having biases, preference for this, I prefer these people over those people. And then the near enemy is just being indifferent, that you don't really care what happens to others. And you think, I have equanimity, but it's really just that you haven't developed enough loving kindness and compassion. Okay. Any other sort of quick questions? Easy questions. Okay, then we go on to the next section, and I have to warn you in advance. Either you're going to love the two sections to come, or you're going to hate them. If you hate them, please don't hate me. And to make this a little bit easy, I made a copy of the electronic version of the manual so I could switch back and forth. Okay, now the next two major sections are going to explain the relationship between the mental factors and the chittas. And it's going to do this from two angles. One angle takes the mental factors, the chaitasikas, and then it raises the question, in what chittas do those mental factors occur? So that is called, technically it's called Sampayoga Naya, Chaitasika Sampayoga Naya. The word Sampayoga means something like association or connection. So it's you take the mental factor and ask, what chittas is this mental factor connected with? Then the second major section takes the citta as the basis for investigation, and it raises the question, in this citta, what chaitasikas are present? What are the mental factors present in each of the chittas, the states of mind? Okay, so first we have an introductory verse. We'll just do the translation. Okay, in the following, we will explain in the appropriate ways the association of each of these mental factors with the different, let's use the Pali word, with the different chittas. Okay, then we see that 7 are linked with every citta. Of course, the universals, the 7 universals, have to go with every citta. The occasionals, those are the 6 occasionals, are linked in the appropriate ways, in different ways. We'll see what they are. 14 are linked only with the unwholesome chittas. Those 14 are the 14 unwholesome mental factors. And then the beautiful factors go only with the beautiful types, with the beautiful chittas. And that gets a bit complex, we'll see when we get to it. Okay, so we have the ethically variable factors. Actually, I see that there's a mistake here. It says 7, it should be 13. Wow. There are 7 universals, but 6 particulars. Does your book, because I have an older edition, does your book, where it says ethically variable factors, does it say 7 or 13? 7. Yeah, you should correct that to 13. And then there are tables which illustrate this, which are very helpful. So in your leisure, you could look through the tables. Okay, so in what way, so how are these mental factors connected with the chittas? Okay, in the first place, the 7 universal mental factors are found in all the 89 chittas. Okay, then we come to the 6 particular mental factors. They're called particular because they're not necessarily present. Okay, initial application, this is vitakka, sometimes also translated initial thought or applied thought, arises in 55 types, in 55 chittas. So it arises in all the types of sense sphere chittas, except the 2 sets of fivefold sense consciousness. And also it does not arise, and also it arises in the 11 types of first jhana consciousness. Okay, let us okay, the 5 types of sense consciousness, that is eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness. And there are 2 sets of the fivefold consciousness. One set is unwholesome resultant, the other is the wholesome resultant. So the results of unwholesome karma manifest in the 5 types of sense consciousness, and results of wholesome karma also manifest in the 5 types of sense consciousness. So we have 2 types of fivefold sense consciousness, so those are 10. And those 2 sets of 5 are considered the weakest of all types of consciousness. Because, say, the eye consciousness, it's just like the camera that just takes the picture. The eye consciousness doesn't know nothing. It doesn't know anything about what it's seeing. But it's just like one flash that just takes in the form. And similarly, the ear consciousness, just in one flash, it takes in the sound. And so, because it has very, very simple, very primitive function, it only has, these kinds of consciousness only have the 7 universals. They don't have any other types of mental factors. Okay, so for this reason, initial application is not present in those types of sense consciousness. So altogether there are 54 types of sense sphere consciousness, and we take away the 10 types, that's the 2 sets of fivefold sense consciousness, so we have 44. And then in the first jhana consciousness, we also have the first jhana consciousness, we also have initial application. So there are 11 types of first jhana consciousness. What are those 11 types? Oops. Okay, one is the first jhana of the fine material sphere, or the form sphere. And that can be either the wholesome citta, when one enters into the jhana. It can be the resultant citta, and it can be the functional citta. The functional is when an arahat enters into the first jhana. So in the first jhana, we have initial application. Oh, I see. Maybe it's easier if you look in the book. Because then you can turn it in the right way. Okay, so we have, if you take the book, I have it on page 113. You see where the universals are. We have the 7 universals, then below the universals, initial application. Then you could follow down till you get fine material sphere, FMS. Then we have 3. Those 3, the wholesome, the resultant, the functional. But then we have remember the 4 paths and the 4 fruits can occur at the level of each of the 5 jhanas. And so the 4 paths and 4 fruits can occur at the level of the first jhana. For those who attain the paths and fruits at the level of the first jhana, initial application will be present. And so that's 4 paths, 4 fruits, that's 8. So we add the 8 of the paths and fruits to the 3 kinds of fine material sphere, first jhana, and then we get 11. So the 44 of the sense sphere, 3 of the fine material sphere, 8 supramundane jhanas. So that makes 55 chittas in which initial application is present. Okay, then when one passes from the first jhana to the second jhana, sustained initial application drops away. Right, if you remember? So the second jhana will not have initial application. So I think I'm going about this in the wrong way. Okay, let us take sustained application. Okay, it arises in 66 types of consciousness, 66 chittas. So it arises in the same 55 in which initial application is present, but it also remains in the second jhana chittas, 11 types of second jhana chittas, that is fine material sphere, resultant, functional chittas, as well as in the 8 supramundane chittas, 4 of the path, 4 of the fruit. And so we have 55 of the sense sphere, and then 44 of the sense sphere, 11 of the first jhana, and 11 of the second jhana. So that's 66 chittas. Okay, then decision arises in all types of consciousness except for the 2 sets of fivefold sense consciousness and the consciousness accompanied by doubt. Are you following this, or is it getting too complicated? No, I'm seriously asking the question. Okay, decision has this very basic function of making some decision in the way the mind relates to the object. And so that will be present in all types of consciousness except the 2 types of fivefold sense consciousness, which just have that very basic function of taking up the form of the object. And then consciousness accompanied by doubt is unable to form a decision, and so decision is absent in that kind of consciousness. Okay, next, energy or virya. the factor of effort, arises in all types of consciousness, in all cittas, except first we'll take the two sets of fivefold sense consciousness, then it's also absence in the five-door adverting consciousness. That is the first consciousness that turns to the object. And then it's also said to be absent in the receiving consciousness and the investigating consciousness. And if you need to refresh your mind about those types of consciousness, you can go to page 155, where you can see the position of the five-door adverting consciousness, which comes before the sense consciousness. Then, after the sense consciousness, comes the receiving consciousness and the investigating consciousness. So energy is said to be present in 73 cittas. And I have to say, I find this a little bit puzzling, because it would seem that the function of investigation would require some energy. So it's a bit puzzling to me how the text could say energy is absent in that citta. But that's what is said. Okay, the next factor, mental factor, is zest, or a better rendering would be delight, or mental elation, even joy. So this arises in all cittas except for those accompanied by displeasure. The cittas accompanied by displeasure, those are the two types of cittas rooted in aversion or hatred. And then there are many cittas which are accompanied by equanimity, and equanimity here means neutral feeling. And when there's neutral feeling, then there won't be zest or delight. Delight will arise only in the cittas that are accompanied by a joyful feeling. Okay, so zest arises in all types of cittas, excluding those accompanied by displeasure and equanimity. It does not arise in body consciousness, even though body consciousness has a pleasant feeling, but it's a physical feeling. So there's no delight accompanying the body consciousness. And zest will not arise in the fourth jhana consciousness. The fourth jhana consciousness, in the scheme of five jhanas, the fourth jhana consciousness has joyful feeling or pleasant feeling, but it doesn't have the factor of piti, rapture or delight. Because if you look at the formula for the cittas of the fine material sphere, this is on page 54. You see that the the wholesome cittas will be on page 53. You'll see that the first jhana, second jhana, and third jhana are accompanied by zest. But then when one makes the transition to the fourth jhana arises together with happiness or pleasant mental feeling and one-pointedness of mind, but zest has fallen away in making that transition from the third jhana to the fourth jhana. Okay, then comes desire, and this is desire not as greed, not as craving, but this is the neutral desire, the desire to accomplish some kind of task. And this mental factor will arise in all chittas, excluding the rootless. The rootless are 18 kinds of consciousness without any roots. And desire is also absent from the 2 kinds of consciousness accompanied by strong delusion. That is, desire is absent in the citta accompanied by doubt and by the citta accompanied by strong restlessness. Okay, we don't have to be too concerned with the numbers, but just trying to understand the reasons why certain mental factors are present in certain chittas and not included in other chittas. Okay, now we come to the unwholesome mental factors. Okay, remember there are 14 unwholesome mental factors. So of these unwholesome mental factors, 4 of them are called the universal unwholesome factors because they're present in all 12 unwholesome chittas. So these 4 universal unwholesome factors are delusion. So delusion is the most basic root that underlies all unwholesome chittas. So it's present in every unwholesome chitta. Then there's lack of shame, lack of this fearlessness, or there's this fearlessness of wrongdoing, lack of moral dread. And then there's restlessness. So those 4 are present in all of the 12 unwholesome chittas. Then greed is present only in the 8 types of consciousness, 8 chittas accompanied by greed. So if you go back and you look at the 12 types of unwholesome consciousness, there are 8 kinds accompanied by greed, and of course greed is present in all of them. And then if you remember, of those 8 types of consciousness rooted in greed, 4 of them are accompanied by wrong view. Okay, so wrong view will arise in those 4 chittas. Then conceit will be found in the 4 types in the 4 chittas rooted in greed, but dissociated from wrong view. So this is a kind of important stipulation in the Abhidhamma, that wrong view and conceit do not arise together, even though they seem quite similar in that they both revolve around the idea of the self. But wrong view is a kind of, I would call it like a conceptual formulation of an idea about the self. So myself is permanent, myself is eternal, myself is infinite, or myself will be annihilated at death and cease to exist. So those are conceptual formulations, whereas conceit doesn't take that conceptual form, that sort of theoretical form, but it's more just a sense of self-importance, elevating the self, or denigrating oneself, thinking I'm better than others, I'm equal to others, I'm worse than others. Okay, so conceit, when it arises, will arise in the 4, and conceit is said to be rooted in greed. sort of like greed or attachment to oneself is the underlying root of conceit. And so therefore conceit will arise only in the cittas accompanied by greed, but dissociated from wrong view. Okay. The next kama group of 4, hatred, envy, avarice, or I would prefer to render miserliness and worry, are found in the 2 cittas associated with aversion, or we could also say the 2 cittas rooted in hatred. So it's obvious that hatred is associated with the 2 kinds of cittas rooted in hatred. But envy takes the form of dislike, that you hate it when somebody else succeeds and you don't succeed. Or you hate it when somebody is praised by others and you're not praised. And so what lies behind envy is some kind of hatred. And then avarice is miserliness. And that means you don't want to give your belongings to others. You don't want to share your wealth or good fortune with others. And so miserliness will arise in the 2 cittas accompanied by aversion. And then the 4th factor mentioned here it's translated worry, but I would retranslate this as regret. And so this is when you've done something wrong and then you think back about it and it starts disturbing the mind, agitating the mind, scratching the mind. And that causes a feeling of displeasure. And so that kind of mental state arises in the citta accompanied by aversion, because you don't like it that you committed some wrong deed. Okay, it's said that sloth and torpor are found in the 5 types of prompted consciousness. This is a little strange to me. Okay, of the 5 types of prompted consciousness, these are 4 that are connected with greed. So if I don't want to indulge, initially I don't want to do something that indulges greed, but somebody persuades me, okay, let's go and steal some apples from the store. And I say, no, I don't want to do it. And they say, come on, it'll be fun. We can do it easily. Okay, so that's a prompted citta when I decide, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. I just don't see that sloth and torpor are present in those cittas. But this is what the Abhidhamma says. And then the 5th prompted citta is the one that's rooted in hatred. So initially I don't have hatred towards somebody, but maybe somebody arouses me and tells me, that fellow, he's speaking badly about you, he's cheating on you, and says other bad things about you. And in that case, because I'm being prompted by others, then aversion arises. So that is a prompted citta. But again, I don't see sloth and torpor arising in that citta. I see sloth and torpor arising maybe when I'm sitting in meditation and maybe trying to focus on the breath, and then I'm going at it for 30 minutes have passed, and the mind is getting a little rigid and stiff. then it gets a little dull, and then it starts to droop, and then I am gone. Yes, please. Please take the microphone.
Could they be present in those consciousnesses because the person has kind of given over their responsibility, or kind of abdicated their zest or engagement with resistance to the consciousness?
Maybe that's the underlying idea behind it. That you're not sort of spontaneously, they're contrasted with spontaneous cittas. So you're not spontaneously driven towards states of greed or states of hatred. But either somebody has to persuade you to develop those kinds of states of mind, or you have to persuade yourself to develop them. So there's some kind of resistance to them in the citta, and then one has to struggle to overcome them. But in my way of thinking, that doesn't really correspond very well to sloth and torpor. But anyway, so this is but I'm just here to explain what the text says. Okay, and then doubt is found only in that one kind of citta, which is accompanied by doubt. So that is the citta without greed, without hatred, but with strong delusion. Okay, let us say this explanation that's given here in the commentary. First, about the mutual opposition or exclusion of wrong view and conceit. Okay, both of these factors are found only in the cittas rooted in greed, for they involve some degree of holding or clinging to the five aggregates. But they exhibit contrary qualities, and so they can't coexist in the same citta. Wrong view occurs in the mode of misapprehending, that is, interpreting things in a manner contrary to their real nature, whereas conceit occurs in the mode of self-evaluation, that is, taking oneself to be superior, equal, or inferior to others. Okay, and then the next sentence makes an important point, and that is, wrong view is necessarily present in the four cittas rooted in greed, accompanied by wrong view. Since wrong view defines that kind of citta, so wrong view must be present. But conceit is not necessarily present in the four cittas rooted in greed, but dissociated from wrong view. That is, sometimes conceit will arise in those cittas, sometimes not. There can be cittas rooted in greed, dissociated from wrong view, but not accompanied by conceit. For example, the example I used last week, the person who enjoys ice cream, he gets that big dish of vanilla fudge ice cream. They serve it for dessert in the dining hall at the city of 10,000 Buddhas. And so special treat. And so then the mind lights up with greed. There's no wrong view, but there's not conceit. You're not conceited that you got a bowl of ice cream. But certainly there's a lot of greed there. But whenever greed arises, it will arise in one or another of those cittas rooted in greed, but dissociated from wrong view. Okay, then we come to these four make up, we call this the Aversion Group, because they occur only in the chittas associated with aversion. So hatred is a synonym for aversion, so it's necessarily found in those two chittas. And then the other three factors, these occur variably, depending on conditions. They don't occur every time a hatred-rooted citta arises. But whenever they arise, they'll arise in a citta rooted in hatred. For example, if somebody says something nasty to me, like if I'm walking down the street in the busy city and somebody says, "Look at that strange fellow, he should go back to Asia, he doesn't belong here," then maybe I get angry. When I get angry, there's no envy. I'm not envying anybody. I'm not being miserly, and I'm not regretting anything that I did. But because I get angry, you could say there's hatred in that citta. Okay, but somebody praises some other monk, we're sitting in the same room, and they say, "Venerable so-and-so is just so wise and so eloquent and such a virtuous monk," and then I'm waiting and waiting, what's he going to say? And then they stop speaking. So then there'll arise envy that this other monk is being praised and I'm not being praised. And so there'll be some kind of hatred is arising, either towards the monk who's praised or towards the speaker. And then there'll be envy towards the monk who's praised. And there'll be some kind of hatred because I was not praised and he was praised. So that is the way hatred underlies envy. Or in the world, maybe you're working at your job and then your colleague gets the promotion and you're left in the same position, and so you feel envy towards your colleague, and so that envy is accompanied by aversion. Not that you necessarily hate the colleague, but you hate it that he got the promotion and you didn't. Okay, then for avarice or miserliness, somebody comes and says, "Will you please make a donation to help these needy children? And I don't want to part from my wealth, and so I cling to my wealth." And so that with that clinging to the clinging to the wealth is greed, but not wanting to part from it, not wanting to share my wealth with others, that is a kind of miserliness. So that not wanting, not liking, that is aversion, and that underlies the miserliness. And then here, worry, but better I would say regret, because you've done something wrong and you don't like it that you did something wrong, and that scratching occurs in the mind. That arises, you blame yourself for one's commissions and omissions. That state of mind is accompanied by aversion. It's not really a strong hatred, but it's some subtle degree of aversion. Okay, then sloth and torpor. So here the commentary says that these cannot arise in the unprompted cittas, which are naturally keen and active, but they arise only in the prompted, unwholesome cittas. Again, I have trouble understanding what the Abhidhamma system will do with my citta when I'm trying to focus on the breath or the qualities of the Buddha or the sensations in the body or the states of mind, and then the mind just gets dull and drowsy and droops off. I don't know where that would fit into this system. Okay, so these are the unwholesome factors. Okay, now we come to the beautiful mental factors, and these are divided into 4 groups. Okay, so of the beautiful, firstly, there are... Oh yeah, please.
I'm sitting here because I'm having too many thoughts, actually, but I realize I've always associated aversion and avoidance, but it's not really the same in the Abhidhamma.
Yeah, maybe.
Because there can be a lot of avoidance that is not maybe hate, not rooted in hatred.
Yeah, I'm losing my...
Well, it's a good time to lose it because then you can't hear me. It's fine.
Is it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're hearing you. Yeah.
Okay.
And that this may not be related, but...
Wait, let me just deal with that point first.
Okay.
Yeah. Aversion here, it's a translation of a Pali word, patika. So it is really an attempt to render that Pali word. And patika has a rather strong sense of ga, comes from the root to destroy. And pati is against. So it's like pressing against, pushing against. Yeah, okay.
So that we don't have a mental factor for avoidance? And I ask that because, and I could be really wrong because it's been a while since I read it, but isn't one of the 3 desires to like not exist? So that really wouldn't be aversion. It could be, but I don't think that's what it's intended for.
Yeah, first, avoidance, there are many aspects to avoidance. So avoidance, first, I think avoidance is an action rather than a mental factor. Yeah, anyway, I've said several times, I don't see the Abhidhamma as being designed to or intended to encompass every type of mental state that might arise, but it really includes those that play instrumental roles either in the basic process of cognition or especially in the design of the Buddhist path. What are the factors, the mental states to be overcome and eliminated? What are the states to be developed and cultivated?
I have a specific interest in it because as I meditate more, I think avoidance plays a major role in my own mental life.
That is really true. Yeah.
Right, and then I happen to hypothesize I'm not the only human being that has that.
Yeah.
One other thing, because you brought it up a few times and opened the door a little bit more today about not agreeing with every last thing, or maybe you would say it differently, and even quoted Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah.
So the other book you gave us to read, you didn't get, I forget who wrote, I can't pronounce the name, so I don't want to mutilate it. The studies in Abhidhamma.
Yeah, Nyanaponika, yeah.
And maybe I misunderstood. He talked about it being alive and dynamic.
Yeah.
So is that the same thing as we're allowed to interpret it through our modern minds?
I think one has to interpret in terms of modern situations, yeah.
Right. So it is okay to, for someone of your stature to write a rendition, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other question about something that need clarification? Okay, then we'll go on now. So we come into the beautiful factors. So altogether there are 25 beautiful mental factors. Of those, 19 are the universal beautiful factors. So those will be found in all the types of beautiful consciousness. Okay, then taking the other groups, the special groups, we have the 3 abstinences, the 3 viratis, right speech, right action, right livelihood. those are necessarily found together in all of the supramundane cittas, in the 4 world-transcending paths and in the 4 world-transcending fruits. Okay, but in the mundane, sense-sphere, wholesome types of consciousness, they are only sometimes present and then separately. That is, they'll arise, as I explained earlier, only on an occasion when you're actually taking the precepts, or on an occasion when one meets a situation where you might commit wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, but then you deliberately and intentionally refrain or abstain from those kinds of misconduct. Then it's the abstinence taken as a mental factor that has arisen and restrained one from transgression. Okay, the illimitables, these are the 2 factors now of compassion and altruistic joy. We have to remember that, just to backtrack 2 steps, non-hatred and mental neutrality are universal, beautiful factors. And so, on that understanding, then, since non-hatred is what manifests as loving kindness, then it would seem implicit that loving kindness is present in all the beautiful types of consciousness. Even though, as I said, it seems to me puzzling that it seems to me that there's some difference between simply the absence of hatred and the presence of loving kindness. Okay, but the 2 illimitables that are variable are compassion and altruistic joy. And these arise variably in 28 types of consciousness. That is, they can arise in 12 kinds of sublime, or this would be the fine material sphere consciousness, excluding the 5th jhana. This is a rather technical point. Okay, it's said that we have the 4 immeasurables. The first 3, loving kindness, compassion, and altruistic appreciative joy, can arise in the lower 4 jhanas. The 4 jhanas that are accompanied by pleasant feeling, because those qualities, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, naturally go along together with a pleasant or happy feeling. The 4th sublime state or divine abode, equanimity, arises in the 5th jhana consciousness. But in the 5th jhana consciousness, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy will not be present, because those states require a pleasant mental feeling. And in the 5th jhana consciousness, there is a neutral feeling. So neutral feeling and the mental quality of neutrality of mind or equanimity naturally go together. And loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy naturally go with a pleasant mental feeling. Okay, so these illimitables will arise in the sublime types of consciousness. Well, that would be in the first 4 jhanas, but only on the occasion when one is actually cultivating those meditative qualities. If, for example, one is practicing mindfulness of breathing and one attains the first jhana or second jhana based on mindfulness of breathing, in that jhanic state of mind, there won't be compassion and altruistic joy. But if one is taking compassion as one's meditative subject and deliberately cultivating the mind, may all those who are suffering be free from suffering, may they all be free from suffering, and one goes on cultivating that state of mind, then as the concentration becomes stronger, one could enter into the jhana, the meditative absorption, with that quality of compassion as the object of meditation, or rather as the mood or attitude of that meditative absorption. And similarly, if one is practicing the meditation on altruistic joy, and one thinks of people who are successful and happy, and then one inwardly rejoices at their happiness, and then one continues to cultivate that feeling of inner joy over and over and becomes stronger and stronger, the mind can become concentrated upon it to the point it enters the jhana of altruistic joy. So then one has the jhanic consciousness, which is accompanied by altruistic joy. And so compassion and altruistic joy can continue in through the 4 jhanas, and then the 4 jhanas can occur as the jhanas that one attains as a human being. Then we have the 4 corresponding resultant chittas, and then the 4 functional chittas of an arhat who develops the jhanas based on compassion or appreciative joy. So in that case, the compassion and appreciative joy will be present in the 4 lower jhanas, excluding the 5th, in these three modes, either wholesome, resultant, or functional. Okay, the illimitables will also be present in the 8 types of sense-sphere wholesome consciousness. So I don't reach the jhanas, but if I just think of those who are suffering and then I feel compassion towards them, those will be wholesome sense-sphere chittas in which there's compassion. And if I think of those who are successful or who are experiencing good fortune, then I rejoice at their good fortune. Those will be sense-sphere wholesome chittas accompanied by appreciative joy. And then the same thing applies to the arahat when he thinks either with compassion or with appreciative joy. Okay, then wisdom goes into combination with 47 types of consciousness. There will be the 12 types of sense-sphere consciousness associated with knowledge. So what are these 12 types of sense-sphere consciousness associated with knowledge? 4 are the wholesome. You have to go back to the earlier chapter. 4 are wholesome. Those would be the 4 types of wholesome consciousness, jnana sampayutta, associated with knowledge. The 4 kinds of resultant, accompanied by knowledge, and the 4 kinds of functional, accompanied by knowledge. So those are 12 types of sense-sphere consciousness. And then all of the sublime are the jhanic consciousnesses, and the supermundane types of consciousness are accompanied by wisdom. The wisdom, according to the Abhidhamma, has different ways of functioning. And this, I have to admit again, it's a bit strange to me. Like in the jhanic state of jhanic absorption, one is not really understanding things sort of deeply and penetratively according to their true nature. It's not insight or prajna as we ordinarily understand it. But it's said that in that consciousness, there's some kind of knowledge, some kind of understanding, and so the wisdom factor is said to be present. It's a bit, to me, paradoxical, because I see the wisdom factor as operative when one is developing insight into the real nature of things. But this is the way it's explained in the Abhidhamma system. Here it says that the character of wisdom varies in accordance with the types of cittas in which it arises, but all beautiful cittas, except the sense-sphere cittas dissociated from knowledge, include some measure of right understanding. So maybe you could say that to attain the jhanas, you need some understanding of the benefits of the jhanas. Okay, so that takes us through the section, it's a very technical section, on the association of the mental factors with the cittas. And you can get a kind of bird's eye view of this association if you go to this table on the table on page 112, 113. On page 113, you see a list of the Chaitasikas, and then going across both pages, there's a list of the cittas, and so you could take any Chaitasika and then follow it down across the page, across the pages, and the dark boxes, the filled-in boxes, will show you which cittas they occur in. Okay, so to take an example, if I want to find which cittas, say, sustained application occur in, so I would go down and take sustained application. Then I follow, I see all of the unwholesome cittas have, the 12 unwholesome cittas, all of those have sustained application. Then I see that the 10 types of sense consciousness are white, they don't have sustained application. Then I see that the types of cittas that occur after the sense consciousness have sustained application. And so through the sense sphere, wholesome consciousness, resultant functional consciousness, all the ways till I come to the first jhana and second jhana. But then I see the third, fourth, third, fourth, and fifth jhanas don't have sustained application. The immaterial sphere jhanas don't have sustained application. And then the path consciousness, third, fourth, and fifth jhana path consciousness doesn't have sustained application. And third, fourth, and fifth jhana fruit consciousness doesn't have sustained application. Okay, if anybody has any questions about this, please feel welcome to ask. And I do have to say that I go through this, when you get your first exposure to this, it's really, it can be bewildering. So it takes time to read it, to study it, to reflect on it. And then maybe more questions will arise. Yeah, please.
This wasn't a question, it's a comment. That number 7 that we corrected to 13 was correct. That's not the number of factors, it's the number of associations, the types of
actually, very good point, very good point.
So there's 16 total relationships.
Yeah.
7 which concern the wholesome factors.
Very good, yeah.
5 concern the unwholesome, and 4 the beautiful. 7 the ethically variable. 5 the unwholesome, and 4 the beautiful. Which comes to 16, which is the number on page 91.
Very, very good. What page is that?
So 91 has association of mental factors as a total of 16.
Yeah.
So the ethically variable factors have 7 different kinds of relationships to the chittas.
I see. That's right. Now I see. Yeah, it's numbered on page 9 in my 93, according to the different ways in which the association takes place.
Right.
Okay.
That's all.
So if you had if you had changed your 7 to 13, please, I'm sorry, I have to apologize. Where's the eraser? Yeah, just let it stand at 7. Okay, now we come to the converse method of dealing with the relationship between chaitasikas and chittas. In this method, we take the chitta as the subject of investigation, and we inquire, what are the mental factors that are present in that particular citta? So here I'm on page 100. So these are combinations of mental factors, and apparently there's 33 combinations, so that's a lot. Okay, first we have an introductory verse which says that 36 factors arise in the supramundane consciousness, 35 in the sublime, 38 in the sense sphere beautiful. Then there's 27 in the unwholesome, 12 in the rootless, and so according to the way they arise, their combination is fivefold. Okay, now we come to supramundane consciousness. These are the chittas of the paths and the fruits. Okay, so in the 8 types of supramundane first jhana consciousness, now remember, the 4 paths and the 4 fruits can occur at a level of concentration that corresponds to the 5 jhanas. So that is why we have 40 types of supramundane chittas. The 4 paths, 4 fruits, each become 20-fold when you take each path in association with the 5 jhanas, each fruit in association with the 5 jhanas. Okay, so in the 8 types of supramundane first jhana consciousness, 36 factors enter into combination. So there are the 13 ethically variable factors, the 7 universals and the 6 particulars, they're all present. Then there are 23 beautiful mental factors, excluding the two illimitables, that is, all of the beautiful mental factors except compassion and appreciative joy, enter into the supramundane types of consciousness. Because the supramundane types of consciousness take as the nibbana as their object, the unconditioned state, whereas compassion and altruistic joy take sentient beings as their object. Okay, in the supramundane second jhana consciousness, all of the above are included except initial application, because initial application drops out in moving to the second jhana. In the third jhana types of supramundane consciousness, all of those are present except for initial application and sustained application. In the fourth jhanic supramundane consciousness, all those excluding initial application, sustained application, and zest. And then in the fifth jhana types of consciousness, those same factors of the fourth jhana are included, except that they are accompanied by neutral feeling rather than by happiness or pleasant feeling. Okay, now, maybe, are there any questions about this? Okay, now we come to the sublime consciousness. The sublime consciousness. Oh, somebody had a question.
Excuse me. I want to make sure it's turned on.
Why don't we see sukha as a cetasika?
Why don't we see what?
Sukha.
Why don't we see it as
a cetasika?
As a cetasika.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. And the reason is that sukha is a feeling, and feeling is present as a cetasika. So the cetasika of feeling is present. It's just that in the lower four jhanas, the feeling is sukha, and then when we come to the fifth jhana, the feeling changes from sukha to upekkha, or the feeling that's neither pleasant nor painful, neutral feeling. Yeah, please, again, take the microphone.
Thank you, Venerable.
Yeah.
Could you clarify for me a little bit the difference between the functional state of mind that arahants and Buddhas possess and the supramundane, which seem to be separate?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Now, the functional chittas, these are the functional, say, we'll take the sense sphere chittas. So, arhats and Buddhas are not spending all of their time absorbed in the fruition consciousness. So the fruition is a supramundane consciousness, which takes nibbana as its object. But the Buddha or the arhats, they will come, they go about their ordinary day-to-day activities. They'll get up in the morning, wash their face, maybe brush their teeth. They'll go on alms round, they'll eat their meal, maybe they'll give Dharma talks. So when they're engaged in these ordinary activities, those are not supramundane chittas. Those are chittas which will be similar to the wholesome chittas of ordinary people. But the reason why they're called functional is because the ordinary wholesome chittas generate wholesome karma with the capacity to produce results in the future and future lives. But the chittas of the Buddha or the Arhats don't create any karma. Okay, so that is in relation to the ordinary day-to-day activities. Then also they will enter into, when they're at leisure, then they'll enter into the jhanic attainments, into the 5 jhanas, or they might want to experience the formless jhanas. So they'll enter into those jhanas and the formless meditations. And those jhanas and formless meditations are almost exactly like those of the ordinary people who enter the jhanas and formless meditations, except that they don't create any karma, and so they're called functional. But the supramundane citas, the 4 supramundane paths, those have the function of cutting off the defilements. So the Buddha, the Arhats, they don't have any more path consciousness because they've already reached the final path consciousness. And they can enjoy, if they want, they could go into the meditative absorption of the fruit. And so they can experience the fruition consciousness whenever they want to. And in that case, then they'll be experiencing the nibbanic consciousness, with nirvana consciousness. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Venerable. I have a silly question to ask.
No question is silly.
Why are we looking at the numbers? Like, why are the how can we use the numbers? Because we're talking about all there X numbers of consciousness here and X number of citas and whatever there. So why is it important to look at the numbers?
I say that it's not, in my opinion, it's not all that important to look at the numbers. The numbers, maybe the reason why they focus on the numbers, because in the early days, when the monks would study these texts, they would memorize them. And so to be able to retain them in memory, it's helpful to know the numbers. But I would say from my point of view, what's more important is to understand the principles behind these different decisions about where to classify this, how many factors are in that, to understand the principles rather than to be concerned with the numbers. I like to develop, I call it an Abhidhamma without the numbers game. And sometimes I have to also confess, like I've done several times, that I don't understand the reason behind these decisions that they made. Okay, so now we come to the sublime consciousness. The word sublime here, this refers to the consciousness of the jhanas and the formless or immaterial attainments. So the fine material sphere and immaterial sphere attainments. These are the citas in those attainments. Okay, so in the sublime types of consciousness, first in the 3 types of first jhana consciousness. So the 3 types of first jhana are the wholesome, resultant, and functional. So 35 chaitasikas enter into combination. So there are the 13 ethically variable mental factors, then 22 beautiful mental factors, excluding the 3 abstinences. Okay, so let's continue, then we'll come to the explanation. But here, compassion and appreciative joy should be combined separately. Okay, then we have some explanation here. Why are the 3 abstinences excluded? So they are excluded because one who is absorbed in the jhana at that time is not deliberately refraining from some type of wrongdoing. If I'm absorbed in the jhana, I'm not deliberately abstaining from wrong speech, from wrong action, wrong livelihood. Those have been already established as the basis for my jhana. And then compassion and altruistic joy have to occur separately because they occur in different modes or different aspects. That compassion takes as its object those beings who are suffering, and it's a kind of feeling of empathy with those beings who are undergoing suffering. And appreciative joy is feeling happiness over the success and good fortune of others. So they occur, they take different types of beings in different situations, and they have a different mode. Compassion, commiseration, that's feeling the suffering of others. Appreciative joy, rejoicing in the good fortune of others. Okay, similarly, in the second jhana consciousness, all those are present except initial application, that's vitakka, because that drops out when entering the second jhana. In the third jhana, all are present except initial application and sustained application. In the fourth jhana, all except initial application, sustained application, and zest or piti. And then in the fifth jhana consciousness, the illimitables, that's compassion and altruistic joy, are not found because, again, compassion and altruistic joy are accompanied by a pleasant feeling, and in the fifth jhana, the feeling is that of neutral feeling. So altogether, for the 27 types of sublime consciousness, the combination is fivefold by way of the 5 kinds of jhana, so the 5 levels of jhana. Okay, now we come to sense sphere beautiful consciousness. Okay, we take first the wholesome types of consciousness. And then we have the first couplet. I think it's useful to go back and to look at these. Whoops. Okay, the first couplet, that would be the consciousness accompanied by joy, associated with knowledge, unprompted, and then the corresponding one that's prompted. So 38 chaitasikas enter into combination. So there are the 13 ethically variable mental factors are present, and then the 25 beautiful mental factors can be present. So all of the beautiful mental factors and the 13 ethically variable factors, except sort of qualification that has to be added, is that the 2 illimitables, that is compassion and altruistic joy, would enter separately, not together, and it might be that neither is present, because one can't have a wholesome consciousness without either compassion or altruistic joy. Again, I'm doing the walking meditation or mindfulness of breathing. So I'm not thinking of other people or other living beings. So it's a wholesome consciousness, but it doesn't have compassion, doesn't have altruistic joy. And then the three abstinences may occur or may not occur. And if one of them occurs, the others don't occur. That is, when I'm abstaining, deliberately abstaining from wrong speech, I'm not at the same time deliberately abstaining from wrong action and wrong livelihood. And analogously, if I'm abstaining from wrong livelihood, I'm not simultaneously abstaining from wrong speech and wrong action. And it might be that none of the abstinences are present in the citta. So we could actually say that the sense sphere, that this first couplet of sense sphere beautiful citta can have a maximum of 38 mental factors, but it might also have a minimum of 33 if we remove the two illimitables and the three abstinences. Okay, when we come to the second couplet, so those will be the two wholesome cittas accompanied by joy, but dissociated from knowledge. So in those cittas, the factor of knowledge is absent. And so that means that the caitasika of wisdom or non-delusion will be absent. Okay, in the third and fourth couplets, those are the four wholesome sense sphere cittas accompanied by neutral feeling. Zest or delight is absent, because delight only goes along with joyful feeling. When there's neutral feeling, then there's no zest or delight. Okay, in the functional types of cittas, okay, in the corresponding four couplets, these mental factors are included in the same four ways, except that the three abstinences are excluded. This is because the arahat no longer has to deliberately exercise, abstaining from wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood. He's finished with any kind. He's eliminated all the defilements, so there's no disposition towards wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood. Okay, then in the wholesome sense sphere resultant cittas, all of those mental factors are included, except that the illimitables and the abstinences are excluded. In the resultant cittas, there won't be compassion and altruistic joy, because those are more active types of mental qualities. And similarly for the abstinences. So in the explanation it says here, functional cittas of the beautiful class arise only in arhats. So these cittas exclude the abstinences because arhats have cut off all defilements, and so they do not need to deliberately refrain from evil deeds. And then the resultant cittas, the sense sphere resultant, exclude the illimitables because they take only sense sphere phenomena as their object, while the Illimitables take beings, living beings, as their object. And they exclude the abstinences because there is no deliberate refraining from wrong deeds when on the occasion of sense sphere resultants. Okay, then we come to the unwholesome types of consciousness. Okay, so we have 12 types of unwholesome consciousness, 8 rooted in greed, 2 rooted in aversion or hatred, and 2 rooted in strong delusion. Okay, so in the unwholesome types, first, in those rooted in greed, in the first unprompted consciousness, let us get it on the screen. Okay, so that is the consciousness accompanied by joy, associated with wrong view, unprompted. So this is the first unprompted consciousness. In this citta, 19 chaitasikas enter into combination. So there are the 13 ethically variable factors. Then there are 4 universal unwholesome mental factors. So that makes 17. And then there's greed and wrong view. And so in that way we get the 19 factors. Okay, then in the second unprompted consciousness, that is the consciousness accompanied by joy, dissociated from wrong view, unprompted. So in this citta, we get the first 17, and of course we get greed, and now there's a possibility that conceit can arise in that citta. It might arise, it might not arise. But if conceit arises, it will arise in this unprompted citta, accompanied by greed, disconnected from wrong view. Okay, in the third unprompted citta, there are 18 states. Let's see what the third unprompted citta is. So this is the consciousness accompanied by equanimity, associated with wrong view, unprompted. So in the third unprompted consciousness, there are 18 states. So we have the 13 ethically variables, we have the 4 universal unwholesome factors, so that's 17. Then, we have 12 ethically variables. We have the 7 universals, but of the occasionals or particulars, one of them is zest. And if the citta is accompanied by the neutral feeling, then zest will be absent. So this feeling, this citta is accompanied by equanimity associated with wrong view, unprompted. Okay, so this citta has 18 states, the 7 universals. Then it has 5 of the particulars, making 12. Then it has greed and wrong view. Let me go back. It has the 7 universals, It has 5 particulars, excluding zest. Then it has the 4 universal unwholesome chaitasikas, and then it has greed and wrong view. So zest is dropped in this citta. And similarly, the 4th has 18. It will have the same, 17 will be the same as in the previous one, except instead of view, wrong view, conceit can arise. Okay, now we come to the unprompted consciousness, the unprompted citta associated with aversion. So 20 mental factors enter into combination, or can enter into combination with this citta. So we have the above 12, excluding zest, so 7 universals, 5 particulars, 4 12 ethically variables, excluding zest, 4 universal unwholesome factors. So that makes 16. Then there are 4 other factors that can enter into this citta. Since the citta is rooted in aversion or hatred, hatred will always be present. And then envy, avarice or miserliness, and worry or regret may be present or may not be present. So these are not necessarily present, but whenever they arise, they will arise in this particular citta. Okay, in the 5 corresponding types of prompted consciousness, that is 4 rooted in greed, 1 rooted in aversion, all of the above states will enter, except that now sloth and torpor will also be included. So that will make a total of 21, 21, 20, 20, 22. So in the prompted cittas, it said that sloth and torpor will be present. Okay, then in the type of consciousness accompanied by restlessness, 15 mental states occur, 11 ethically variable factors, excluding desire and zest. So desire drops out, the desire to accomplish something, to do something. Because when the mind is very restless, there's no desire to do. And then the 4 universal unwholesome factors will be present. So that's 11 plus 4 plus 15. And then in the type of consciousness connected with doubt, 15 mental factors will be present. So decision drops out and doubt occurs. So when there's doubt, then one is incapable of making a decision. So doubt is so decision drops out and doubt comes in. Okay. It's 5:30. And if your mind is turning in circles, I don't know any cittas which say the mind the citta rotating in circles. But I'm going to pass over the rootless cittas. You can, if you're interested, you can look at this on your own. You know the basic principles now for interpreting this, and the explanatory guide will be helpful. So you can take the rootless chittas on your own. So next week we'll come into chapter 3, the miscellaneous chapter, which is very interesting and not as... I think this is the most difficult section in the whole manual of Abhidhamma. So we've already sort of passed through the dark night of the soul. It will get, I think, sort of clearer and I think more interesting when we come especially to the functions of consciousness. Okay. Should I ask whether anybody has any questions? Simple questions that could be answered. Is that UN? Yeah.
Venerable, I was wondering what mental factor would fear correspond to?
That's a very interesting question, and it's something that's occurred to me as a rather strange, that in the suttas we find the Buddha mentions fear many times in different ways, but we don't find a mental factor for fear in the Abhidhamma. And it's a puzzle to my mind. And I once asked, there was a Burmese Abhidhamma master named U Silananda, who was living in San Francisco. Many, many years ago, I had asked him that question. Then he said to me that fear is a kind of form of hatred or aversion. But it seems to me that the mental tone, quality of fear is very different from aversion. So I just don't know. And somebody here I saw.
Okay, I have a question. So when you're spacing out, what kind of chitta is that?
When you're
spacing out?
Yeah.
What kind of chitta is that? Does that produce?
What does spacing out mean?
It's just sort of like people will be talking and your mind's just not paying attention.
Oh, the mind is one?
Yeah, wandering.
That would probably be classified. Well, it really depends on what one is thinking about. Like if, say I'm giving a lecture and you're sitting here thinking, when I get out of here, I'm going to get some vanilla fudge ice cream. Then it would be chittas rooted in greed. But if the mind is just restless, wandering from thought to thought, then it would be a restless citta. Any other questions? Yeah, please.
The only reference to humor in the Abhidhamma seems to be the smile-producing citta. Do you have any thoughts on what humor would be, where it would fit in?
It's also said that humor can be sort of experienced through the 4 sense sphere. I hate to be so humorless about it, but through the 4 sense sphere chittas. There would be the 4 sense sphere chittas accompanied by greed. Like the 4 sense sphere chittas accompanied by joy and associated with greed, or the 4 sense sphere chittas accompanied by joy and associated with knowledge, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. There was something, I remember a note on this. Okay, according to the Abhidhamma, it says arhats may smile with one of 5 chittas, the 4 beautiful sense sphere functional chittas, and the rootless smile-producing consciousness mentioned here. Yeah, okay, so now I understand. Okay, so humor would be experienced with either the 4 chittas accompanied by joy, rooted in greed, or the 4 chittas, 4 wholesome chittas, accompanied by joy. Yeah, the 4 wholesome chittas accompanied by joy. Yeah, so there are those 8, and then the Arhat smiling consciousness for 9, so 9 chittas which experience humor. Okay, so maybe we should end for the day, and then we'll come back on Monday for chapter 3. Oh, that's right. That's right. Is there a forgetting consciousness? Okay. Okay, so we share the merits with the Dhamma protecting devas, the nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas, the fierce spirits, and then with all beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang sata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadaya avici hetato etantare satakayupapanna rupi arupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting.